lot of times students already have a sense of this. A chemical reaction has been said to occur if you get new substances are formed. And I mentioned the whole getting sunburned because it's a chemical reaction between the ultraviolet radiation, I think it's A or B, from the sun actually mutates your cells. So yeah. So when you tan, the tan is actually a response to getting radiated. So tanning is not actually very good either. Sunburning is really not good. But new chemical substances are formed. And this here in blue, all it's saying, and we're going to balance equations after your test. So on Wednesday, we'll come and talk about balancing equations. But like if both of my hands, like if this is a hand what we start with, and this is the hand what we end with, and kind of between them is like a chemical reaction happening. What this says is that if it's an ordinary chemical reaction, not some sort of nuclear reaction, then we are going to have, like if we have carbon and hydrogen over here, we're going to end up with carbon and hydrogen over here. We have oxygen over here somewhere, it's got to show up over here. It's actually one form of the conservation of matter. Okay, so there is that. So new chemicals are formed, something new is formed on the product side, but you still have the same atoms and all that. So sometimes it's easy to see a chemical reaction has occurred, and sometimes it looks like one occurred and one didn't, and sometimes it didn't look like one occurred, but one did. So here's one. If you have a color change, that might be an example, or that might be an indication that a reaction has occurred. If you have some sort of precipitate, some sort of, you went from, like this is a clear solution in the dropper, and then this is a clear solution down here, but when you mix them, you get a precipitate, some sort of chemical reaction has occurred. The formation of a gas, that's almost always means that new substances are formed. The liberation of heat, perhaps, what we call exothermic, some sort of chemical reactions occur to create that heat. Not necessarily, but it could be. Similar to the release of heat, the release of light energy could be an indication that a chemical reaction has happened. So this is just kind of the caveat. Be careful that something that looks like a chemical reaction may not be. The only way we know is to basically go in after said reaction has maybe occurred and to look for new substances, and then we'll know. And that will take some sort of chemical analysis. Okay. And then like down here it says be careful, because even though it doesn't look like a chemical reaction has happened, that something may have, new substances may have been formed. So assignment slide, dun, dun, dun. This will be due on Wednesday. I took a look at these aren't bad at all. All right. I want to talk just briefly about how we kind of shorthand notation describe a chemical reaction using a chemical equation. We don't use sentences, we use a chemical equation. And thank goodness, I'm not a wordy person. So it can, picture's worth 1,000 words, a chemical equation can be worth 1,000 words. So it takes on this general form, and I kind of held my hands up here. This is the reactants, this is what you start with, this is what you end with, and then between my hands would be the chemical reaction arrow. So we read chemical equations like we read sentences from left to right. So now if you stay in chemistry, or if you if you'll stay in chemistry, you'll notice that there will be some equations that are written there. Like the most common one is what's reversible, where it can go from this to this, reactants to products, and the same reaction goes from products back to reactants. So we'll have a two-way arrow. So it's kind of a little of an exception. But chemical equations that summarize the reaction, chemical reaction, kind of take on these two forms. I use the word unbalanced chemical equation, and your textbook, TRO, uses skeletal equation. So it means the same thing. That brings some really good, what we call qualitative information. But we're going to spend a little bit of time on Wednesday talking about how you can take an unbalanced equation that represents a reaction and you can balance it. But I want to start with the unbalanced equation because it doesn't get the due it maybe should. So again, the equation is a shorthand notation of the reactions going on. You need to show what you start with, those are called reactants, what you end with, those are called products. Notice that we're not going to write out the words like water, the word water, we're going to write H2O. So we're going to make it nice and concise. An unbalanced chemical equation can also, it might, show the physical phases, and I have a list coming up like S for solid, G for gas, L for liquid. It might show that, kind of nice, concise. It may also show if there was any certain special reacting conditions that need to be in place in order for your reactants to proceed to form products. Nice and concise. So these little letters are what you might see next to the reactants of the products. S for solid, L for liquid, G for gas. AQ means that you have taken that reactant or product and it's running around in water as your solvent. Okay, so AQ means it's dissolved in water. And that's also nice and concise, very important information to know. So an unbalanced equation can kind of concisely, like I said, tell you if there's anything the experimenter needs to know in order for your reactants to go to form products. For instance, if heat is required, you're going to see it over the reaction arrow. If a specific temperature is required, you'll see it over the reaction arrow. A catalyst actually is neither a reactant nor a product. A catalyst is just something that's not consumed during the chemical reaction, and it helps facilitate the reaction so that it occurs faster. Does it have to happen in the dark? Okay, any sort of special reacting conditions you're going to see over the reaction arrow. So those things like what the reactants and products are, what physical phase they're in, any sort of just general reacting conditions, those are what we call qualitative information. So it's the quality of the chemical reaction represented by the equation. What unbalanced chemical equations don't give us is quantitative information. So quantitative means quantity, means the numbers. So it does not give specifically, again, we're going to talk about this on Wednesday, it doesn't balance it, doesn't give the number of particles that you need to start with and the number of particles that you'll end with if your equation's not balanced. So these will also be due on Wednesday. And that's how far I wanted to get. So short, gives you a little bit of time to study for your test for tomorrow. Don't forget to look, I would look over all of Unit 3, including problems and terms and concepts. And that's it. Yes, sir.
Could you go back this slide real fast?
Yeah. Either way.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we'll see you tomorrow. Nice hat, Cole. Nice hat.
Thank you. I got a couple of years actually. Let me re-dye it up here. It's getting a little sun-bleached. So yeah, I got that one done, but this one kind of stumped me on naming them. Like with the ides and different types of food and suffixes and stuff.
Yeah, I can give you some hints, but in the long run, you're just going to have to memorize some of those. So, like for instance, like this one up here, the ide, you mentioned ides. If it's just one atom, like the K, that's the K plus. right?
Mhm.
Plus 1. And the Cl is the Cl minus 1. If it's just one atom, you're going to end with IDE. So
Okay.
that'd be potassium chloride.
Yeah, because I noticed there are some that are constants, and then there's some that aren't. Like I think some 8s are like plus
Yeah,
3s,
and that's
some are
why.
plus 4s. and
Yeah,
stuff.
when I do the lab, I'm very careful to bring students through.
Mhm.
The first, the Cl minus, that's what we call monoatomic, one atom. And the other ones you're just going to have to memorize. So
Okay.
like we jump down here to number 5. In that case, you have to memorize that ClO is ClO with a minus 1, and that is hypochlorite.
Mhm.
So you have to memorize that the name of ClO minus 1 is hypochlorite.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably study that all tonight then and try to get that worked out. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. We don't have too many Mondays left. Maybe 5, 4, not very many.
Something close to that, yeah.